A judge invalidates Indiana's Medicaid expansion waiver. The U.S. Supreme Court gives presidents broad immunity, plus Donald Rainwater's property tax proposal, and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending July 5th, 2024.
Indiana Week in Review is made possible by the supporters of Indiana Public Broadcasting stations.
This week, Medicaid members on the Healthy Indiana plan will not have monthly payments for the foreseeable future. The Family and Social Services Administration made the announcement after a federal judge vacated the 2020 approval of an Indiana Medicaid program over a number of policies that act as barriers to coverage. The ruling stems from a lawsuit filed against the federal government. It said a number of policies within HIP restrict access to coverage and services, including power account contributions, which are monthly payments required to access the version of HIP with better coverage, HIP Plus. Non-payment could result in being knocked down to the basic plan or losing coverage entirely. Indiana Medicaid Director Cora Steinmetz says Indiana does not agree with the ruling.
While HIP members remain covered today for Medicaid, the ruling creates uncertainty regarding which services are covered and removes authority for certain administrative aspects of the program's operation.
The judge that issued the ruling said that because Medicaid members derive their eligibility through Indiana's state plan, they would remain eligible even with the vacated approval. FSSA says power account contributions as well as co-payments will not be required while it explores legal remedies in response to the ruling. Cost sharing, including co-payments and premiums for the Children's Health Insurance Program and MedWorks, will resume as planned.
Does this court ruling throw Indiana's Medicaid situation into chaos? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Elise Shrock, Republican Mike O'Brien, Whitney Downard, senior reporter for the Indiana Capital Chronicle, and Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting State House Bureau Chief Brandon Smith. Mike O'Brien, we've talked about this a lot on the show. We've been talking about Medicaid a lot on the show as lawmakers and policymakers have been talking about major changes to the program because of how expensive it's getting. How do you move forward with this ruling hanging over your head?
Well, so whenever we talk about have these Medicaid stories, most recently with the caregiver situation, the changes being made there, we're always talking about people's lives, vulnerable populations. That's of course all true. What's also true is you also have to solve a political problem for this program, which we solved by structuring a Medicaid expansion population in a state that did not want to expand Medicaid under Obamacare. And we did it on the basis of a previous Medicaid expansion before President Obama was even elected, under Mitch Daniels, who expanded Medicaid to begin with under the original Healthy Indiana plan. You sold that politically, and we expanded Medicaid under Obamacare, which I'm not even sure every lawmaker would even know they did. We were expanding the HIP program. That's how it was always messaged. Right. We're expanding HIP.
2.0.
We're not expanding Obamacare into Medicaid expansion. The Obama administration at the time went along with it because Indiana was a red state. No red states were going to expand Medicaid, but we had this separately branded Medicaid product that we could go sell. And the way it was sold to legislators and the administration was, this isn't just welfare. This isn't just health care that's paid for by the government. This is a program that requires the enrollees to have skin in the game. It was a HSA styled. The power account was intended to be like what an HSA is to a commercial health insurance policy. Right. And that was successfully sold to lawmakers and to Hoosiers who were skeptical about expanding Obamacare at the time. And so it's important to remember the political problem that was solved by expanding Medicaid the way we did in Indiana. So does it throw it into chaos? No. I mean, the worst case scenario from the state standpoint is we go back to a world where premiums weren't paid. But we also changed the program to create a wealthier benefit for the enrollee if they participated in that program, and that was a benefit to them too. So we'll see what the path forward here is and what the reaction to lawmakers is. The legislature is already, because of the money, because of the money involved in the Medicaid funding shortfall and the fact that this program is growing financially, is taking up a larger and larger share of the budget, already paying attention. So I'm sure there will be a reaction in 2025.
Is part of the problem here, as lawmakers try to figure out what that reaction is, that I mean, this is not the final ruling on this subject.
Sure. Well, and the political history that you laid out is accurate. The thing is, this is a living and breathing thing, and there are many things that have changed since then. The public input that we're hearing, largely from people from southern Indiana, is that these payments are barriers, and we've seen that these are barriers largely for people of color. So as this program has emerged, we're hearing how it works and how it doesn't work for certain people, rural areas, people, again, of color. We are also seeing more and more people age in Indiana, more and more people becoming eligible. We're seeing a lot of different things happen over the last year with Medicaid, where the system has been a bit clunky. So this program is expanding, and even the Medicaid director herself said this is a multifaceted program. And as this price keeps ballooning, Indiana and the legislature needs to look at this not just as a Medicaid issue, as a funding issue. We're going to have to start looking at the whole health of our state. What are the other policies we can put in place that address, like when we're addressing this, when people turn 60 or 65, it's too late.
Yeah.
What can we do to make sure that people are aging well? What does our quality of water look? What does our quality of place look like? What type of trails do we have that are accessible to people? What type of rural health care are we affording Hoosiers? Like, this is a big thing, and when we're paying it on the back end, it will keep ballooning. We're rearranging the deck chairs.
And that was partly what the public health funding initiative that we'll see what new funding, if any, they give for that will involve.
And I just want to kind of mention that even the state itself is skeptical whether having this program is beneficial. You know, you're bringing in very tiny amounts of money. Sometimes it's $1, $10. And how much are they paying to administer that program? And the state is not able to give you a very good number on that because it is offshore to the other entities who are managing this. But because of that, there have been internal audits that have suggested that maybe it's not as effective, and maybe we are adding red tape that is actually costing us money. You know, one Republican lawmaker told me earlier this week, you know, if we are sitting here wondering about our budget crisis in Medicaid, maybe it's time to reconsider whether we are adding something that is actually costing us more than it's bringing in.
Although selling that politically is going to be a challenge.
Well,
and I'm paraphrasing.
It's been administratively,
No, sure.
I mean, the MCs that run that program would tell you the power account is administratively very difficult to implement.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the fact that we haven't been using them for so long because of the pandemic. But Niki, we're also talking about a pretty significantly sized population here.
Yeah, it's a huge amount. I think when we originally put HIP 2.0 in, they thought maybe 350,000. It's up to 60,000 people who are relying on this. I think the fear that comes, and that if I were someone on that program, is that the Republican supermajorities, they're looking for a way to save money, and the fear out there is, well, we take this completely voluntary Medicaid expansion that we did, and we just say, that didn't work, and that would be a huge savings to the state.
Yeah, though it's hard to take away something you've been giving for, I mean, it's a decade now or so, or close to it.
Well, another thing to add is that the federal government pays 90% of this.
Right.
You know, we are paying a very small amount at this time. Of course, that will change.
Yeah. All right, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled along partisan lines this week that presidents have near total immunity from prosecution for official acts and placed a high bar for holding them accountable for private action. According to the decision, presidents can't be prosecuted for exercising their core constitutional powers, and even in situations where former presidents might be prosecuted after leaving office, they are entitled to at least presumptive immunity from prosecution for official actions they took as president. Conservatives hailed the ruling as a victory for former President Donald Trump in what they view as the politically motivated prosecutions against him. President Joe Biden said the decision is a dangerous precedent that undermines the rule of law. Meanwhile, Biden faces more calls to step aside as the Democratic nominee after a disastrous debate performance last week. Elise Shrock, we're going to talk about the Supreme Court ruling, but I want to talk about President Biden first. Does Joe Biden give Democrats the best chance to keep the White House?
Look, no sitting president by any party has not been nominated by that party. And I'll also say this. This is kind of like when I talk to some of my crisis communications clients and I say, do you want me to tell you what you want to hear? Or do you want me to give you the realistic field of play? And the realistic field of play is this. It is July. We are 4 months out from an election. We are weeks out from a nominating convention. Joe Biden is going to be the nominee. Our choices are the guy that incited January 6th, the worm guy, and an uber elder statesman. Those are our choices. And with the uber elder statesman, we get a cabinet that looks like the people it represents, experts in their field. We get someone who has the opportunity to meter some balance to a Supreme Court that is wildly conservative, who, with the onset of Donald Trump, I have less rights than I did than before his reign took effect. And a Supreme Court who has basically told us that they're not scared to roll back other rights. There is a lot at stake, and I would love to say to Democrats there is some West Wing character who can deliver some soliloquy that can put them to bed at night, that can kiss us on the forehead and tell us that tomorrow we will wake up and everything will be okay, but that's just not how it is. Our democracy is on the line. It is tenuous at best. Things are at stake. And if you want something to be hopeful about, there are so many local, wonderful candidates. Stop doom scrolling. Look out in your local Democratic Party for the candidates that you can write postcards for, that you can volunteer for. It feels good to do something. That's an opportunity that they have. There's so much more than president on the ballot. And so Joe Biden is going to be the nominee, and we have a lot to vote for. A lot is at stake. And I think you could ask the same of the Republicans. Is Donald Trump the best candidate that you could put forward at this time?
When Lyndon Johnson announced that he wasn't going to run again, there was lots of time for Democrats to coalesce about who ended up being Hubert Humphrey, although obviously Hubert Humphrey then lost. That in and of itself might be a sign, but is Elise right? At this point, is replacing the nominee just a fantasy?
Elise, that was a wonderful job of explaining that it doesn't really matter that he can't put a sentence together and he's got to be in bed by 8 p.m. But he'll hire well. But he'll hire well. He'll put good people. We can Bernie's that guy all the way through 2028.
Like the last guy.
There are practical limitations, sure, and there's a convention process that then leads into ballot certification at the state level and that process. But in modern politics, unprecedented or not, we're doing unprecedented stuff every day in American politics right now. We're impeaching everybody. Both sides you can't impeach the other side fast enough. That used to be a tool we never used, that we considered sacred and extraordinary. We're doing that all the time. I don't think if Joe Biden came out tomorrow and said, I don't have it in me, but here's a list, but I trust my convention to go pick the guy that can and beat Donald Trump for all the reasons you think he needs to be defeated, I don't think that's an impossibility.
It seems increasingly, the noise is getting louder around the idea of replacing Joe Biden, but it also sounds an awful lot to me like only Joe Biden can make that call at this point, right?
Yeah, and I think that one of the names that's floated up is Kamala Harris, and I don't think that there's enough consensus that she could beat Trump among people who are worried, and so they think that Biden is their best shot. Whether or not they're right, I don't think we know that yet, but I don't really see a lot of certainty and confidence in people on either side about what exactly their front runner is.
The first party that gets rid of their octogenarian candidate is going to win. The polling with Niki Haley, for Republicans was extraordinary. It's like she's walking into the White House. Call the election off. We just can't do it.
Someone pointed something out online that I thought was an interesting way of viewing this decision, if such a decision has to be made, which is if Kamala Harris is the nominee, the race becomes about Dobbs, it becomes about abortion access, it becomes about Donald Trump, it becomes about all of the things that you just kind of listed off. And if Joe Biden's the nominee, the race is about Joe Biden's age. Is that too big a problem to overcome?
Look, I'm not a strategist, but I would think they are setting themselves up for the entire campaign just responding to his ability to do the job, which automatically just makes it nearly impossible to win. I mean, if your whole focus is my guy can, you know,
and 80% of the country thinks he can.
Which is wild considering the other candidate and the track record of the other
thing that I found interesting following it is we all saw it. It was a terrible, terrible debate for it. But, you know, we had newspapers coming out and saying that Biden should drop off. Did we have a newspaper come out and say that Trump should drop off when he was a convicted felon? No.
Not even the New York Times.
No.
That published the Biden.
All right.
Exactly.
Speaking of the president, then, the Supreme Court decision. As we look ahead to November, and right now, if the election were held today, clearly Donald Trump would be elected, and that seems, I'd put my money on that right now. Did the Supreme Court just give him a blank check to pretty much do whatever he wants, to whomever he wants, whenever he wants, as long as he tries to make it official?
And ironic that it was on the July 4th holiday, which, you know, if you're looking over the years, are we that surprised? Because it's not even just a king that we were trying to declare independence from, right? It was a system of peerage where the top people in the peer system held all the money, unquestionably. You know, in the British government, that's what we were also declaring independence from, and, you know, ruling after ruling has also allowed that to happen. It's just a lot of irony, but it's also a problem. I mean, I don't think that is the type of executive power that the current president wants. I don't think it's the type of power that Trump 2.0 should have, clearly. And that, again, is what is at stake if we see a second round of his presidency with a Supreme Court like this that has unchecked power to keep making rulings of this nature.
I don't understand how in the system of conservatism that I've always understood growing up in this country, how a conservative Supreme Court could say, oh, yeah, the executive should have pretty much unlimited power.
Yeah, but you're arguing that that president will argue that, no, that was official. The thing that I'm being challenged on the judicial branch, that was what I did was official, and they've got to still go make that argument.
Right.
It was interesting that both political parties had the exact same message. Trump has total immunity. It was what Trump said and what Republicans said, and it was what Democrats said. Obviously for, you know, intending opposite reactions. But he doesn't have total immunity, and I do think to the degree of official. I don't know how you can be president and you're the one guy that can order a nuclear strike, and you're not immune from being hauled in front of a world court at the end of it. You know, you've got to for whatever the justification for, you know, the acts that you make, especially those that involve declaring war and operating a war or. So I do think the president should have that immunity, but I don't think the Supreme Court's, frankly, I didn't think the Supreme Court's decision on this was like all that remarkable. I think it was like politicized, but I think like the court's still going to be able to call
it's the difference
strikes
between
on
like
that.
Official and non-official acts.
Yeah, but
right?
the court's still just going to have to decide that, and whoever the president is going to have to make the argument that was official.
Reading Justice Roberts' opinion, though, Chief Justice Roberts' opinion, though, I mean, he seems to define. They didn't draw a hard line on what is official and what is non-official or private. But it felt like he blew the doors open on official pretty widely. I mean, talking about like if members of Trump's Justice Department told him you lost this election, those conversations are official. And if he were sued privately over January 6th, you couldn't have those officials testify as for what they talked about because it was an official action, and that can't be brought up. That was also a part of the ruling. That can't be brought up in court, even on a private case. So, yes, I agree that the court is still going to have to call those balls and strikes. But did the Supreme Court make this a lot broader than I think a lot of people were?
And I think a lot broader than people were expecting.
Yeah.
I think that people had a pretty firm idea of what an official act could and could not be, and then it kind of got a lot murkier and grayer. And I think that it still remains to be seen. I'm no constitutional scholar, and I couldn't really tell you what all the minutia of the ruling fallout might be, but I think that that's something that just remains to be seen.
It does feel an awful lot like in the history of this country, there's maybe one president who would have wanted to exploit this, which was Richard Nixon, and two, Donald Trump. Doesn't it feel like he's the one guy who's going to try to push this ruling as far as it can go?
Well, yeah, he has to because he's facing multiple cases and multiple felony charges.
If he gets back in, I'm saying, will he try to push it even further?
Maybe. I mean, to me, the most frustrating part of the ruling was that, I don't know, I felt like it was kind of all over the place. This is okay. This, we're not going to tell you whether it was okay. This was not okay. I mean, they basically just set it up for individual fights over every little thing, and that's frustrating. I think a lot of people,
giving the parties a tool to go after the other
people
guy.
really wanted some definitive answers, and we didn't get that as much as we wanted.
All right, time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question. This week's question is, should Joe Biden step aside as the Democratic nominee for president? A, yes, or B, no. Last week, we asked you whether conservative Democrat Terry Gooden should be nominated for lieutenant governor by Democratic convention delegates next weekend. 69% of you say yes, 31% say no. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Libertarian gubernatorial candidate Donald Rainwater has a proposal that could dramatically reduce many people's property tax bills, a plan that involves changing the state constitution. The current Constitution caps homeowners' property taxes at 1% of the property's assessed value. Rainwater's proposal would cap them at 1% of the purchase price. That could blow big holes in local government budgets, and Rainwater says the state needs to reform how locals are funded.
When property taxes and assessments are going through the roof, and citizens are asking the General Assembly for help and for relief, the majority of them, their answer is, well, we don't have anything to do with that. That's a local problem. And you can quote me, that's a lie.
Rainwater says he would use the governor's office as a platform to pressure lawmakers if they don't follow through with his proposal.
Niki Kelly, does this proposal work financially speaking?
Look, we have no idea if it does because, and I've been on this kick since Suzanne Crouch and the Acts of the Tax thing. We have got to stop throwing out proposals that have, millions and billions of dollars worth of impact without saying what that impact is. Like, how much money would be lost by changing that to 1%? It would be astronomical. And to just be like, oh, local governments can tighten their belt. No,
well, to be fair, his
point
point was local governments not so much tightening their belts as the state government backfilling what they would have gotten. But then, of course, that blows a huge hole in the state government budget.
Right, exactly. And so we just need to be more upfront with people. If you want this tax reduced, you're going to have to give up some services. And I'm just tired of playing the game of here's my catchy phrase or doesn't it sound great to cut everyone's property taxes when we're not discussing the other end of it.
I want to talk more broadly about the idea of changing the state's property tax system a little bit, because increasingly, the state lawmakers have had this 2-year now study committee on the entire tax system. And it started out with Senate Republicans wanting to get rid of the income tax. And kind of everybody's starting to go, oh, maybe that's not a great idea. And it seems like people, we saw it from the Republican gubernatorial candidates, people are talking about property taxes more than anything else. Is that going to be what lawmakers have to key in on?
And I want to kind of preface that, Rainwater and any other property tax proposal would really need to consider renters, because there are a fair, significant amount of renters in the state, and, those landlords are not always passing those savings on. But with property taxes, it is just such a complicated system. You can't just make one tiny little lever and flip it and make it easier for everybody. Every time this General Assembly tries to tackle property taxes, it ends up being a 50-page bill minimum. And
yeah, I mean, politically, going back to the earlier conversation, the political difficulty of doing something. This would be very easy politically to do. Hey, let's lower everybody property taxes. But I mean, the mechanics of that are almost impossible.
Well, I mean, for a certain population, I mean, there is a lot of sympathy. There's not a lot of sympathy for me at 45, owning a home that's going to increase in value for the next 40 years. And I'm going to realize that gain at some point. I'm still working. But people that aren't working or own their home for, or they're retired, they own their home, and now they've got this asset that's probably going to be liquidated in death. But they've got this bill sitting there, and they don't have any money to pay it because they own their home. But it's great that the value went way up.
Yeah.
The value spiked because just housing values are outpacing easily outpacing even this inflation or inflation in the last 2 years.
We've even
so they
seen-
got to figure out some solution for probably the most sympathetic group.
Yeah, we've seen some legislation on that topic. Is if we do anything to the property tax system, is something for folks on a fixed income seem like the most likely scenario?
I think probably. I mean, I think yes, and it's going to be something that will also affect the Constitution, which I mean, that's going to take several sessions, like general sessions. So before we even see any impact for this, it will be, at least 2 general sessions, so 4 years, and a referendum. So maybe 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So they would have to start on it right away.
Yeah, Dan Leonard vindicated he didn't want to put those caps in the Constitution all along. But I mean, as part of the problem here too, that whatever lawmakers do to property taxes, it's not the state balance sheet that gets
that's
affected.
That's totally it. And obviously the state lawmakers were interested in what we can do because they've got extra money on the state side. Once they go to homeowners, though, and property taxes, it's not their budget. Yeah. But they also have to be cognizant that, you can't gut schools and you can't stop firefighters from coming to someone's house.
The state has been flush with cash for a while, not so much local governments. All right, that's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Elise Shrock, Republican Mike O'Brien, Whitney Downard of the Indiana Capital Chronicle, and Niki Kelly of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at wfyi.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time, because a lot can happen in an Indiana week.
The opinions expressed are solely those of the panelists. Indiana Week in Review is a WFYI production in association with Indiana's public broadcasting stations.